welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
This is Jessica with Turn the Page podcast, Syosset Public Library. And today our guest is joining us from far, far away, but also one of my favorite places. Please tell everybody who you are, where you are at the moment, and let's talk about your book.
Thanks, Jessica. My name is Rachel Donohue, and my novel is The House Vanishing, and I'm talking to you from Dublin in Ireland.
I absolutely love Ireland. I've been there twice. I would love to get back. It's one of my favorite places.
That's wonderful. Well, hopefully you will. Hopefully we'll get through this and you'll be back.
That's the hope for sure. So House Vanishing was so good. And if this is like a weird thing that sometimes comes to my mind. Sometimes when I think about a book, I associate it with like either a feeling or a sound or something. But this book, I'm associating with a nice, rich piece of dark chocolate. It is so layered and there's so much subtext and so much going on that it's like to be enjoyed with a nice rich piece of dark chocolate and a dark red wine. It's so thick with mood and with just everything. And I'm describing it really poorly. So I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the plot and then we can go from there.
Oh, Jessica, thank you so much. On a simple level, I suppose the story is set in 1990 in Ireland, where we have a student called Louisa, a scholarship student, who goes to a rather strict, vaguely decrepit Catholic boarding school, where she forms obviously she's a bit of an outsider, but forms a close attachment with another student with quite a different background, a lady called Victoria. And they come under the influence, I suppose, to some extent of both each other, but also of their art teacher, a sort of bohemian chap called Mr. Lavelle. So that's sort of one of the narratives going on. Then separately, we have a modern narrator, a journalist who is basically investigating what went on at the school. It's been shrouded in rumor and mystery because we discover that Louisa, in fact, along with Mr. Lavelle, seemed to go missing at the same time at a certain point in time in the winter of 1990. So we've two parallel perspectives taking us through the story.
And one thing I thought was interesting was that the person who is sort of investigating, what was it, 25 years later? Investigating the disappearance or the vanishing had been a neighbor of Louisa's, but much younger. She lived across the street from her. So in a way, the story is quite personal to her, even though it unfolded before she really came of age to understand what was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. She has this kind of a sort of crossing sliding doors nearly point in time where they nearly, they sort of met and sort of knew each other, but at as you say, a big age gap. So I suppose that's partly her motivation. She's also somebody who's just, is interested in what happened, obviously, but having this extra link. And that kind of, I didn't set out with that link there. It did emerge in the writing. It sort of fed into the story in terms of she had this link and it added depth, I suppose, to her investigation and her passion for finding out what happened.
Yeah, it was interesting because it had a lot of things that it brought up. I mean, I know that you touch upon true crime and women's fascination with true crime, which I don't want to say it's hot right now, more so that it's something that's really more being acknowledged right now. I can say from personal experience for myself, I had been fascinated with true crime since I was a child, but it wasn't really something that I felt comfortable talking about with other people because it seemed weird. And, you know, why would you want to watch unsolved mysteries or
which I
why,
do love watching.
yeah, right?
Yeah.
But then it emerged that plenty of women are really intrigued with true crime, and for whatever reason, crimes against other women or other women who disappeared. And there's lots of reasons why people say, like, they'll say it's either it's like it gives them a sense of power to be outside of the story, or, you know, maybe they want to help solve it themselves, like in the situation of your reporter. But Temple House Vanishing was so beautifully done because it's not only does it have that true crime angle, but it also has like a class angle, and it takes place in one of these academic settings in a boarding school, which is even more intriguing.
No, it's interesting. And I think I think at one point, just in relation to the whole true crime element, one of the characters speaks about it being women are interested in it because it's the opposite of romance. You know, like dramatically, you know, the opposite of romance, you know, and I think that's interesting. But I very much, I like playing, and certainly as a reader, which I am more than anything, I like playing with tropes, and I like playing with I don't like good and bad characters. I like the unknowability of people, and I think I wanted to play with that, and I did that, I think, to some extent, with the perspectives that you can't ever really know fully who people are or what happens or why, you know. And I think, you know, I was trying to explore some of that because, you know, there's a cliche of a teacher and a student and what we might think that might be, but I wanted to play with that as well. And also female friendship being something that's very valuable at a particular point in well, throughout your life, but maybe particularly so in the intensity of that teenage phase. But also, it can also have a dark side, you know, that intense teenage friendship can have a very dark side to it as well. And so it was all trying to play with that in a to some degree, but also just create an interesting, you know, vibe and mood. And for me, like, the books that stay with me, like you said, Jessica, at the beginning, are ones where I really can just feel either the heat of a place or the darkness or the mist, you know, the sort of Jane Eyre vibe, or, you know, that kind of a whole world. And I really tried hard to create a world, you know, a world in miniature that a reader could just escape to for an afternoon if they had some time.
Yeah, the more you talk about it and the more I'm thinking back to reading it, it had like a gothic tilt to it. And I love that it took place in the 90s, because I was a young teenager in the 90s. I was a little bit younger than Louisa and Victoria, but there's something about just kind of calling back to that time when nobody was really connected. There weren't smartphones, there wasn't an internet that was accessible to regular teenagers, and just the idea of being at that point in your life where you are trying to figure out who you are and being dropped in a situation where you're an outsider. And you talk about the intensity of female friendships. Louisa and Victoria's friendship is very intense, but it doesn't always take the turns that you think it's going to take. And that was part of the whole ride of trying to figure out exactly what was going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I said in the beginning, they have different backgrounds. You know, one is richer than the other, but they form this, you know, they see something in each other. When Louisa meets Victoria in the art room initially in the summer house in the school, she has this sense of recognition, which she sort of says it was a bit like love, but then I wouldn't really know about that, you know, in that sense of this is somebody who might get me. And, you know, they are both outsiders, but they've kind of decided to be, you can be the outsider who gets things, you know, thrown at you in the canteen, or you can be the outsider who decides to turn it into a sort of VIP status nearly, you know. And as a result, they're even more dependent on each other, because it's like, look, we know nobody likes us, but we've got this special bond. we've got this special bond. Our teacher sees something in us that nobody else sees, and playing with that. And I think the 90s is important, particularly, you know, from the Irish perspective, which may not be as relevant or of interest, but you know, it's the end of a world. I sort of wanted to capture the end of an Ireland that was very steeped in, you know, deep Catholic moral teaching on an everyday basis, you know, not just when you went to church on a Sunday, but literally every day, you know, whether it was prayers, confession, you know, the rituals of the religion. So for me, I was going back to, I went to a Catholic school. I didn't go to a boarding school, but I was trying to remember some of that, the intensity as well of, as you say, Gothic or even Baroque element of Catholicism. It's so rich, the iconography. And even as you're rebelling against some of that, you're also living within it. You know, notions of sin and shame and, you know, playing with the sort of mind body. Am I my mind? You know, is my body separate? If the body is sort of damned, but my mind isn't, you know, what does that mean? So I kind of wanted to go back to that because that Ireland has disappeared. You know, it went by the end of the decade. It had gone by the end of the 90s. So for me, it was important to set it then. And then as well, obviously, from my own point of view, I had those sort of references, cultural reference points and the music and the whole way of kind of going on.
Right, Louisa has a Depeche Mode shirt in
Yeah.
in a
Enjoy the
picture.
silence.
Yes, which as a
Yeah.
as a librarian, I was like, I should get that shirt because everybody thinks libraries are silent.
Or silent. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody, it's so funny thinking about it. I was like, oh, that is a natural t-shirt for a librarian to
You
have.
need to go on the internet and find that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, and again, going back to the age of the
Mm,
girls and the point that you're talking about, just like that big change in
mm,
Ireland,
mm.
that's the biggest point of change, I think, for an adolescent. It
Yeah.
when you're really questioning everything. And
Mm,
there was a lot of you know from the beginning, you know Louisa is not around anymore, and
mhm,
Mr. Lavelle is sort of a mysterious figure, and he still
mm,
kind of eludes me when I think back to
mm,
it. You know, I keep
mm,
going back to, it was this. No, wait, it was
mm,
this. But
mm.
the
He's a bit
question,
of a shapeshifter. You know, he's hard to
yes,
grasp. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but remembering also that regardless of what he was or wasn't or might have been, no matter what, he was in a position of power over every
Mm,
single one of those girls, be them the
mm,
most pious, wealthy, well-to-do, or somebody like Louisa, who was very much an outsider, or Victoria, who she was an outsider, but she still
mm,
came from the world of the other girls. And that
mhm.
becomes very clear later on in the
Yeah.
story,
Yeah.
that
Absolutely.
even though they are both outsiders, and I believe she calls them the maidens, who are like the mean girls, right?
Yeah. The main chamber. Yeah. Yeah.
They're still, in a way, she's still more in that world than Louisa can ever be.
Absolutely. And I think I've a kind of a liking for narrators, and I think Louise is one of these who are unwitting, you know, not so much unreliable, not so much unlikable, but actually they just don't see what maybe we're seeing. And
Mhm.
you know, they're not aware of, as you say, the power structures maybe that some people are they're almost flirting with an alternative way of being, but really they will retreat.
Yeah.
Or they've the option to retreat into another world that you don't have. So I kind of, and again, back to that point of unknowability, you know, I sort of play with that idea of you really just don't know other people's minds. You
Yeah.
know, there's that no matter what you think you do, but you never really do. Or you can be surprised, you can be made a fool of, you can make an error of judgment, particularly when you're that young. But I think at any age,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
you know, people are separate beings, and you know, are you part of the tribe? Are you not?
Yeah.
Really? You know, do they let you in? Do they not? And if you think you're let in or not. But I like unwitting narrators in my reading. I do. I think, you know, Ishiguro or someone does that so brilliantly in his books, like Remains of the Day and stuff. I just love watching somebody make not see what they should be seeing. You
Yeah,
know.
I would say that
Mhm.
she is probably more on the reliable narrator side, because
Mm,
no matter what, and no matter, some of the hardships she's been through and family stuff that went on before she found herself
mm,
at Temple House, she was very innocent in a
mm,
way compared
yeah,
to even the girls who were maidens and the Vestal Virgins, as
yeah.
Victoria said at one point. Because she had not been tainted by this privilege that these other girls
Yeah.
had. She was really coming in as they looked at her like a charity case, and
Mm,
no matter how close she and Victoria got, and no matter how much Mr. Lavelle said she saw in her, that was always there. And I don't think that was really something that had come into consideration for her.
no, I think you're right. I think she's that combination of like book smart, but
Yeah,
innocent. And sort of thinks she's there on virtue and hard work and the things that should be applauded, and but actually they don't really mean anything when you turn up in the wrong color jumper, or you don't have the big car driving up and dropping you at the gates,
or you
and you
have
didn't
secondhand
holiday.
shoes, or
Yeah, you
right.
don't summer in places, you don't have that access. She doesn't have that sort of rock to stand on. So, she's smart, but she is naive, and she trusts the wrong people.
So, without giving too much away, were you influenced by specific, like, classic novels? What did you have, almost like a playlist in your mind, or an actual playlist that you listened to while you were writing this?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote it's my first book. I had written a lot of short stories before that, but um the character of Louise actually came out of a short story. She was in the background of a short story, and I kind of couldn't rid myself of her. So that's on a practical level where it came from. But I do love reading sort of 19th century novels. I like Victorian novels. I like to escape to a world. I love Russian writing. I wanted to, when I sat down to write every day, because I didn't know what I'm doing. Didn't study English. I always felt I just have a natural storytelling, but I don't really know what I'm doing, a lot of the time. And so for me, I just sat down every day and I was like, what would I like to read? If I was sitting down to read this book, what kind of mood would I want? What kind of atmosphere? What kind of setting? And that really drove me. Almost the passion of a reader drove me in my writing, I think. And I had a very clear picture of the ending, and I had a very clear picture of the beginning, but I didn't know how the two would link up. So every day was a kind of learning and a surprise for me. But from the mood was autumn, the mood was mist, the mood was rain. It was foghorns down the coast, and just that isolated seaside lonely house, and I just wanted to try and create that for the reader, but in a way that felt not 19th century, that felt somewhat recognizable, but at the same time was playing with some of those elements, because that's what I like, and it's all I know.
Well, it's fabulous, and I really do think people are going to love it. I will be recommending it
Oh, thank you.
constantly. It was just so good. I could not put it down,
Mm. Oh.
what I'm trying to say. So just one thing we touched upon quickly, and I just want to go back to it, and then we could talk about if you're working on anything now.
Mhm.
Um, I thought it was interesting that, again, you chose the 90s when you're talking about teachers and their boundaries and what
Mm.
are appropriate boundaries, because
Mhm.
nowadays, if you are not very careful about what your boundaries are with a teacher-student relationship, like mentoring students that are teenagers is difficult. And
Mm.
it should have been more difficult, I think, back then. And I
Mm.
think lines got blurred because there wasn't so much focus on whether or not it was appropriate or inappropriate. I know of people who were older than me, but had married their teachers, or their teachers had married their student, and they continued to teach in the district that they were teaching in. And at the time, it was just like, oh, okay, they happened to meet after they graduated, and then people would be like, yeah, no, they didn't. They knew each other very well in high school. Or and then there are the teachers who would really just go out of their way to just be available and support systems for kids, but you wondered where the line really should have been drawn. They really do look at Mr. Lavelle in the present from the point of view as, well, was he just a really, really dedicated teacher, or was what he doing grooming? Was he singling out the students who were maybe a little bit more isolated from the rest of them? But then you find out that every single one of those girls had a crush on him. So
yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think it is like, it is that whole past is another different country, when you go back and think about it, as you say, various stories or things you remember and going, now, really, what? That is so weird. And so I definitely think that is definitely there. I mean, I didn't want to build him as a cliched character either, and I wanted to play with, his weaknesses, and also look at the students, that there was a time where there was possibly a kind of badge of honor in being the chosen one, or the chosen two or three who somebody really in authority adored. And I think that was the case as well, in addition to boundaries, regulations, culturally, things being different on the teacher's part, that there was also something on the students who were very young, looking to somebody who's charismatic and then wanting the attention, and then a teacher, depending on who they might be from a moral point of view, playing with that. So it was kind of gray area stuff. But at the same time, when you look at it now, you see it in the case of, my God, would I want my daughter there? No. Would this be appropriate? No. But I did kind of want to show both sides of that. And because it was a different time and it was a different culture, and that's what, certainly in the school I created, I felt I could do that.
it worked beautifully. It was just so beautifully done. And I think that it's going to find a lot of audiences. And I also think it's a really good book club book because I think it's very discussable. I
Yeah,
mean,
I've done in Ireland. It came out in Ireland last year and in the UK, and I've done some fabulous book club chats because there's so many perspectives, and I think it is, hopefully now, maybe this coming into the autumn, it might be a nice book club pick for people to sit around a fire and chat about,
Yeah, I do. I think that there's just so many layers to what may or may not have happened. And you find out not all mysteries go unsolved, but beyond that, there are still more mysteries within the story. So I think it will sit with the readers long after they have closed the last the cover.
Oh, thank you. I hope so. And I like to think, I know, I hope that it can be read by a lot of ages too. When I was writing, I was like, you could read it at a certain age and maybe take something from it. You could maybe read it at a different age and, older and see other stuff. And again, from my own reading, that's what I like. I like to know I can read something at, 17, but then maybe read it again at 30 and see it very differently. So I'm hoping that, it might find a home on a few bookshelves for people anyway.
Much like people looked at Mr. Lavelle differently as adults than as children.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
are you working on another book at the moment?
Well, I've actually just published my second book in Ireland and the UK, and it's actually come out in New Zealand and Australia as well. So that's literally just come out in May, and so that's exciting. I've been in a kind of writing frenzy for about 2 years, literally. So I've taken a bit of a breather this year. I'm going back now in the autumn with something. But yeah, I've just published that. So yeah, book 2 is out over here.
Can you tell us anything about it?
Yeah, it's it's kind of a summer gothic book. It's called The Beauty of Impossible Things, and it is set in a small Irish seaside town one summer at the end of the 1980s, where a girl who lives with her mother, they run a kind of boarding house, and she sees some strange lights in the sky one summer's evening, and a lot of paranoia and strangeness follows in terms of what goes on in the town. So I think if you like Temple House, you'll probably like the second one.
Yeah, I want to read it.
Particularly odd.
It's like, oh my gosh, when is it coming out here? Because I need to read that.
But yeah, so a lot of writing, but it's good. It's been good. Sometimes you just have that mood. You have to go with it and write and write and write, you know. So it's been a busy 2 years.
Well, we are so thrilled to have you for your debut novel, even though you already debuted in Ireland already. We are happy to have you here. And please come back when your next book makes it over here.
Absolutely. And I've been looking at your lovely town online, thinking I need to visit. It looks so nice.
Oh, thank you so much.
Most beautiful place. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it is quite cute. There's a few, and then there's a few areas around that are also quite nice as well.
Yeah, totally. I'm like, when I I've never been to America, would you believe? So you're on my list.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Cool.
Yeah.
Let us know. We'll be happy to meet you and show you.
Give us hopefully. Well, we're vaccinated and we'll be ready to go whenever we're allowed.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page. Our guest today was
Rachel Donohue.
And we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.